Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and today we are looking at the Meep, a sort of aristocrats mono black deck that comes to us from the Doctor Who, I believe it's the Secret Lair. It's a very strange and interesting card that I'll have a lot to say about its deck building, and a good amount, not so many direct additions, but maybe some directional additions. I hope that tracks. This deck comes to us by donation from Lexa. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, Lexa. They say, my sister is getting this Secret Lair in physical, and this commander seems super interesting. So I figure I would build a deck I could conceivably one day get completely in paper. Would love some advice, but trying to keep it away from the insanely expensive stuff right now. There are expensive things in there, but Lexa owns those cards. So we'll definitely take a look and we'll hopefully have some things to say. I'm not quite sure what this creature is. I've, only seen so much of Doctor Who, and it looks adorable, which must mean it's a good guy. That's the only thing I can discern from this photo. But it is very interesting, and in a moment we'll get into what exactly makes it so interesting. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. Alright, so who is the Meep, and why are they the mono black commander for our pseudo-aristocrats kind of aggro tokens deck? I couldn't really find a way to describe this, and you'll kind of see why as we describe this card. So the Meep is a 3-mana legendary alien, I was going to say angel, alien in black, just mono black. They're an 0/4 with ward, pay 3 life, which means anytime someone wants to target this, they pay 3 life, which is not that much of a cost in Commander, but a cost nonetheless. And they have this ability that says, whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, creatures you control have base power and toughness XX until end of turn, where X is the sacrificed creature's mana value. So what does that mean, like, as a deck building concept? Well, the Meep is really interesting. So this is a deck where you want high CMC cards, not high power cards, because usually we think about cheating out high power things, but here we're looking for things that just cost a lot of mana, and it doesn't particularly matter what their power is, though as you'll see later, the lower power is generally better. So we need to cheat out big creatures, or at least, not have to pay the full mana cost on very expensive creatures. Then we need a bunch of different creatures to take this benefit, right? The Meep obviously will get this benefit as a 0 power creature. It's all upside, whatever you sacrifice. But for everything else, we want a large amount of creatures because it affects our total board, and we want them to be particularly low powered. That's kind of a strange thing to get, right? So this is pseudo tokens, pseudo cheat into play, pseudo aristocrats because we're sacrificing a creature, but not really aristocrats. It's like the Meep deck. Like, there's actually a lot of different ways to kind of build that, and I think that's the main thing I'm going to say. We can start here and we can take a look at the deck and the deck that they're going for, but I'm actually going to take a second to start with my additions. We're going to do this a little backwards because I think there's I want to talk about the different directions we can build this deck into, and I'm going to suggest very much so we pick a direction and we kind of go all in on it. Now this deck hasn't completely found its direction. It's kind of flavoring a lot of these different directions at once, which isn't a bad idea, but it makes the deck really tricky to build, whereas I think the best bet is to pick a direction and go into it. It's mostly in one direction, and I think there's some flavors of all directions that are worth playing, but let's not get too much into that, and let's start talking about these cards and what directions I could see this deck go into. So, let's see. The first thing I thought of, personally, because we can think of like different kindred decks or different kind of stylized decks, but the first thing I thought of, and we're not going to go too much in these directions, but is Infect, because what creature type or what creature ability gains the most of changing its base power, then Infect, right? When everyone's health goes down to 10, it's very, very worthwhile to make your creatures into, let's say, 4/4s or 5/5s. There's also something notable that the majority of Infect creatures in these colors have very, very low power to begin with. That's what makes them balanced, right? So all of these cards here, almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all of them have 1 power, which means if with the Meep, we're sacrificing a creature that is at least 1 power, at least 2 mana or higher, we are growing our creatures. Now, a bit of a problem with this is that we do have a reasonable limit to how many of these Infect creatures we can play, and how many of these Infect creatures we might consider good, right? Like, there's just not a lot of options, and they're not ideal. Especially when we have cards like we just can't play, like Blightsteel Colossus, because it's just the antithesis of what we actually want to do. This creature is already lethal. By sacrificing any other creature, we just shrink the Blightsteel Colossus until it's no longer lethal. Now, beyond that, what we can do is, once again, these are like almost deck archetypes I want to be building. An archetype for the Meep with Infect is that we could just, and I haven't done this, but I can do that now, is we can also go into this color and pick up all the creatures. Let's go creatures and say toxic, and find all the toxic creatures, right? Now, these creatures won't scale as well because they do not have Infect, which means they will only deal the Infect damage that the toxic creatures represent. However, they do have the same thing where usually, but not always, let's sort by mana value, that they have relatively low power, right? And so, not as often, but a large amount of them just have very, very low power, namely the first few, and so we can still get an advantage out of them from sacrificing a bigger creature. Mainly, I'm looking at the Skull Dweller, the Blightbelly Rat, the Mirror Convert, the Pestilence Siphoner. These are the ones that catch my eyes the most because they tend to have low power and they tend to have relevant abilities for the deck. However, are they fantastic? Not so much. We'd want to be looking at ways to create a lot of toxic or Infect tokens, but once again, in these colors, we don't have a lot of options. However, I'm sure you could build a deck within these means. It's not the one I'm going to suggest. The next one that kind of caught my eye, and this is going to kind of lead into 2 different ones, and it is creatures that have 0 power and toughness and come in with +1/+1 counters. So notably something like the Endless one, and we will be returning to this a little later, but notably something like the Endless one comes in with +1/+1 counters, right? So when we change the creature's base power or base power and toughness, it always increases. Something I kind of went over really quickly is the fact that the Meep doesn't just add power and toughness is one of the things that makes it very, very difficult to build around. If this was just like add +5/+5, we'd be playing a bunch of 3 power creatures, 4 power creatures with no downside. Because it's specifically that it transforms those creatures to that base power, we have to have them our creatures have to have the lowest possible base power in order for us to make the most out of it. So that's why I thought about these kind of cards. Now you notice a lot of these are artifacts. We will get to that in a second, but there are some black cards here. The Vibulid is definitely one of them. Never mind, I just finished reading the card. It's awful, don't play it. But Xenosquirrels, Fester Creep, Embodiment of Agonies, notably Hagra Constrictor, even something with like Oathsworn Knight, but this doesn't work as well as you think it does. These kind of creatures are really interesting as cards we can play, as every attack we make with our commander and sacrificing creature will dramatically increase their power and toughness. Things obviously like the Necrosquido, what a name, or ones with evasion are really, really interesting to me. But it's important to note with things like Mindless Automation or going back to it, the Oathsworn Knight, is that the bonus we get from our commander is only during that turn after we attack. So cards like Oathsworn Knight that usually become invincible if you can otherwise increase their power and toughness outside of +1/+1 counters do not have this ability, because at the end of turn, they will just die to state-based actions as they go to 0 toughness. So this was interesting, but I don't know if the way I wanted to kind of go with this deck. Then we have probably one of the 2 more successful ways of doing this, and it made me think of Modular. So Modular is probably one of the best ways to play this deck, where you are using, same idea, a bunch of artifact creatures that are 0/0s that grow with +1/+1 counters, and then you can supplement this with black artifact support, with proliferate, with black +1/+1 counter support. You have a lot of options to play with this. Once again, we're somewhat limited in our creatures that we have, but if you supplement the modular these modular cards with artifact cards from this list, amongst other black and other types of +1/+1 counter support, I'm sure you have a direction you can go into. There's recently been a lot of black artifact support from, I believe there was that Esper Urza, the Grixis Mishra, the 40k deck, I forget what they're called, the Necro somethings, the weird skeleton guys. Sorry, I should know this better, but I don't. There's just been a lot of black artifact support, so you have a lot to work out of. So that's definitely a direction that we can go in. But there's one more that I find a little interesting, and I don't know what's really here, and this is fun, but once again, not the final one I'm going to suggest. But looking at Endless One, I started thinking of the ultimate token, which is the Eldrazi Spawn token. I say the ultimate token because they are the lowest power and often easy to make. Pawn of Ulamog is very useful in a deck like this because as your creatures, non-token creatures die, you create 0/1 Eldrazi Spawn. Not only are these creatures useful because they can be sacrificed for mana, but I think it's also notable that, as mentioned before, because the Meep transforms our creatures, we have the highest level of, we have the most to gain from using Pawn of Ulamog, because we're going to be able to just make so many 0/1s that just benefit the most from that transformation. So I do really like that, and one that I thought of, and probably not the best one, and I'm sure the other Eldrazi, what were they called, Scions, would work in the same way, because they are 1/1s instead of 0/1s, but they're still easy to create. One I was thinking of, Dredrone, which is generally not a particularly good card, but one that really catches my eye, as it is a creature, it's a 5-mana creature that creates 2 0/1 colorless Eldrazi Spawn tokens. If you wait for that Summoning Sickness to be up, not only can you attack and sacrifice the Dredrone immediately to make your creatures 5/5s, you have 2 0/1s that would benefit very much from becoming 5/5s. How good is this strategy? I don't know. I'm not particularly sure. I think it's an interesting flavor, and it catches my eye. I just don't know how much, without building the deck here and now, I cannot predict how strong this direction would be into it, which is once again why I'm not naming this direction. So what is the direction I think we should kind of lean into for a number of reasons? Well, it's a direction we actually already have quite a few cards going into, and feels like the most consistent of the options, and it is zombies. We have a lot of options here that are very, very good, from Nested Shambler to Dredge Summons, just a lot of ways to make a large amount of 2/2 zombies that I think is probably just the best direction to go in. Making 2/2 zombies, yeah, they're not 1/1s, so technically they're not the most ideal creature token we could be making. I don't know why I stopped on that creature, but they are very accessible creatures. The zombie type is on a lot of relevant creatures, and creatures that don't have the zombie type sometimes still create zombies, which is really, really nice. It is very functional to create a large amount of them, and like Dread Summons, Empty the Pits, and like Liliana, we could even play the other Liliana, the Dreadhorde General. There's just a lot of ways for us to kind of mass out these zombies and then turn them into 5/5s ideally. And I really, really like that idea. I think that's that's a really good direction going. Now, the other reason I really like zombies is because something I've kind of been alluding to, but I do want to touch on before we start looking at the final editions and then the deck itself, is that the Meep is probably a deck that instead of it being run off of the commander, I'd rather have the deck be accentuated? Maybe that's not the right word. Maybe empowered by the commander. I don't think we should build around the Meep. I think the Meep should add to the deck. That's just, for me, it's kind of an ease of access thing. I think it's the most successful thing we can do with the Meep, because otherwise we're going to be bending ourselves in so many different directions to make the Meep functional. And instead, if we have a really good base level deck and then we add the Meep to it, we're going to just find ourselves doing a lot better. And to me, out of all the decks I've named, with the closest one otherwise being Modular or Black Artifacts, I think zombie, and specifically zombie tokens or zombie kindred tokens, I think we're going to have the most success with. The deck itself will probably have the most kind of backups, the most like general good cards, the most if Meep doesn't work out, we have a backup plan kind of situations. So to me, generally, I want to lean into that direction. So that in mind, I'm just going to close all the other ones because we won't be looking at them. I want to use some cards. So I've got a few cards I want to name here. 3 of them I think generally should go into the Meep. Then I have some zombie options, some good, some okay. I just wanted to bring out some ideas for the zombies, and then we'll go through the deck itself and see what works and what doesn't. So there's a few cards that I think that definitely need to be here. I think Ashnod's Altar is namely like one of the most powerful cards this deck is missing, because it fits into the strategy so well. Even if we don't fully build around the Meep, like I said, this is the card for the Meep, right? Because this is a deck where we have very, very high cost cards and a lot of tokens to benefit from those high cost cards. And generally, this deck is about looking at it in one particular direction, where you're looking to feed your high cost creatures into your low cost creatures, into your tokens, right? But we can actually look at that the other way around as well, where we can look at feeding, like using Ashnod's Altar to sacrifice our tokens to cast our bigger creatures. And I definitely think that is a direction that is worth considering, and either way, this deck should definitely be playing it. And I think it's notably missing. Another card that's notably missing that feels like the perfect card for this deck is Ancient Stone Idol. Ancient Stone Idol is notable because it works very, very well with our commander. What happens is we attack with all of our creatures and our commander's ability goes on the stack. Now note, this is not one of those like, because it's a sacrifice, it has a very specific kind of trigger. We don't have to target anything. The trigger is just going to go on the stack. With the trigger on the stack, if we have attacked with enough creatures, we can easily flash in Ancient Stone Idol. Once we do, we can sacrifice it to the Meep, make all of our creatures 10/10s as their base power and toughness, and as an addition, get the 6/12 trample creature out of it as well. I think that's really, really good. Generally, this is a very interesting card. Otherwise, it's like a weird defensive kind of card. Or super, super aggressive card, but in a deck like this, I see it being the most successful. Making a bunch of zombies 10/10s, it's like basically the easiest thing you can do, and you will be very, very happy with the result. If you're playing any other version, obviously notably the artifact version, you'll still be happy with this card. This card is very, very good. One more card, all of these general cards just happen to be artifacts, which I think also kind of lean towards the artifact version of this deck, but still this fits into any version of the deck, is the Dross Golem card. It has affinity for swamps, which means it costs 1 less for each swamp, and you can just ignore the rest of the text. The main idea here is once we have enough swamps in play, this card is free, and then it is a 5 CMC card, so once we sacrifice it, all of our creatures become 5/5s, which is around the number I like to hit generally, so this is kind of nice. The downside is outside of the artifact deck, this card kinda does nothing, whereas at least Ancient Stone Idol is a very good blocker and a very big creature in itself. This is just a 3/2 fear. You're not going to be very excited by playing it if you're not using your commander. So keep that in mind is what I'm going to say. All right, so looking at zombies, there's been basically when I was looking at zombies to build around this, my additions basically all had the idea that I want these creatures to do something, and also in addition to that, to create tokens. We can see that with like Liliana's Death's Majesty. We can see it with Invasion of Innistrad. We can see it with like Dread Summons and a few others, where the main idea of what we want to do is to do something and create some bodies at the same time. And so the ones I was thinking of are likewise, I want to create a body to sacrifice, and I also want to create bodies to sacrifice too. I think the easiest and the most notable one is Newcraft Mob. This is a card that I really, really appreciated recently. I built a that Mardu Reanimator 2 power or less. Why can I not remember her name? I have to look this up now. Alesha, who smiles at death. I built Alesha a little while ago. I've taken her apart since then, but the one card I was the most impressed with was Newcraft Mob, because at 0 power by itself, it was very easy to reanimate, and then would kill itself by creating enough tokens and create an army and then get reanimated again. This card works in almost every direction that we want it to. Not only is it one of those +1/+1 counter creatures that just starts with 0/0, which is amazing for us, it is also creating the bodies that we want to in order to buff them. And then finally, at 6 power, 6 CMC, we're very, very happy to sacrifice this and turn all of our zombies into 6 mana creatures. 6 power and toughness creatures as their base power. I really like this. I think this is probably one of the strongest ones you can put in. Then the next one, I'm getting to the one you're all thinking of in a second, but first, another one that caught my eye was Death Tyrant, which is a card that I've seen a few times and I've never been quite impressed with, but I think here I'm pretty impressed with it. It has once again, it has an ability where whenever attacking creatures you control or blocking creatures an opponent's control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So already it creates a bunch of bodies, which is something I tend to like, so it creates 2/2s. But notably, this one works kind of backwards, where it reanimates itself as opposed to trying to find a way to put it on the battlefield. Unfortunately, this does mean, this is like the other zombies I'm going to note, we are going to play this card a bit fairly, but once it's out there, you have that attack. You can have an attack with it out. You can choose not to sacrifice it and reap the benefits and get a bunch of 2/2s, but later when you have another attack, you can sacrifice it, get a bunch of get all your creatures into 5/5s, and then you can even at that moment reanimate the Death Tyrant before damage is dealt and your creatures die. I also think this works really, really interestingly, is that if you attack with it and sacrifice it, it will see itself die and create at least 1/2/2 to replace itself. So it's not attacking, unfortunately, but that is just kind of a neat interaction. So this one's interesting. It's probably not the best, but it caught my eye as doing a bunch of things that we want. And then I have 3 copies of, yes, the cards you were thinking of, which is the Grave Titan variant. All of these cards, though obviously Grave Titan is the best of them, are all available to do the same thing. They are creatures that create zombie tokens on ETB. Grave Titan obviously is the best one and not too expensive either, with Digraph Ghoul, Horde, and Rakshasa. I feel like I'm mispronouncing that. Gravecrawler, who used to be a cat demon but is now just a demon, also works pretty much the exact same way. Of course, this creature is a little better because it makes 2 permanent zombies, whereas the Horde exiles cards, which is still impressive, but makes decayed creatures. All 3 of these, I think, are rather good. They all do the same thing of going wide with zombies while giving you something to sacrifice. Obviously, Grave Titan is the one you want to sacrifice last because every attack it does generates more and more tokens. If you've ever heard me talk about Grave Titan, it is not a Titan I'm generally impressed with, but when we are in zombie tribal, or kindred I should say, or if we are tokens, this is a card I very much enjoy. So very, very impressed by this. So these have just been examples. There's a lot of different examples. I don't want to go too much into them because a lot of them are already in here, but I just want to bring these up as ideas for the deck builder and anyone else who wants to build the Meep, because it is a very, very interesting commander. Looking at what we have here, there's a lot of stuff I do like, but there are a few things I don't like as much. So let's look at our curve. I think our curve is pretty nice. We have to assume at a certain mana cost, a lot of these things, the goal is to cheat them into play. And I will note that some of these cards aren't built equally, right? We have a bunch of cards that like care about the graveyard. We have some cards that care about our life total. We have some cards that care about the different creature types we have, like if we have creature types. If we don't, I say that, but what I really mean to say is whether they're tokens or not, which is the Marshmith's Titan, which is a devotion card, which gets weaker as we do not have tokens. As we have more tokens and less regular creatures. We have a bunch of delve style cards, which I do like them here, but we have to kind of make sure to fund our graveyard. Fund is the word I'm thinking of. Or Emrakul, the Promised End, who is very, very strong, but requires a very specific graveyard in order to get the most out of it. So I really like that we have a lot of different styles, but some of them are a little less consistent than others. And that's something that I find a bit troubling, because I think some of the ways we're going to get this deck online is going to be easier than others, and I think that a lot of testing is going to be required to find that. Still, let's look at the ones that catch my eye as being somewhat weaker. So Jadar, despite being a zombie enabler for the zombie deck, I think here is one of the places he's the weakest, because once again, it's cool that we do have token generation once per turn, but it is a decayed creature. Now, it's not so bad in the sense that that is an additional attacker you will get, but as we know, if you sacrifice a token with Meep, all your creatures die. And as far as I can tell, there's no way to take advantage of that. So these creatures are only going to be used as attackers. And since we can't like Bitter Blossom, at least here, has the benefit of creating bodies over time. And even then, I'm going to be kind of hard on this card, but at least we can get like 3 or 4 flying fairies that have evasion, and we could turn them into 5/5s for a particularly good attack. Jadar, on the other hand, can only at most have 1 creature with decay. That's not even saying that if we grab Jadar after, let's see, activating Crowded Crypt, and the next turn you draw Jadar, until you use all of those decayed zombies, which you might not do on that precise turn, Jadar actually will not generate any other tokens, because he doesn't care where the tokens come from. All he cares about is that they are decayed or not decayed. So I think he is not ideal here. Let's see. Orcish Bowmasters and the army mechanic is kind of interesting. I do really like that here. Obviously, we can find a good zombie army enabler, I would be more impressed, but Orcish Bowmasters is just bonkers in Commander, so there is no downside to playing such a strong card. Looking a bit further, Tangled Colony is interesting, but not really. I think the problem with this is a very, very specific card. It has a high power level, which is one of the things I don't like in this deck. So if we think about this fact that we sacrifice a 5-mana card, all our creatures are 5/5s, all that gives Tangled Colony is +2/+2. And then your opponents are probably not going to block it, right? Because it represents so much, or they'll chump block it and not particularly care of how much damage, because if they'll just block it and they won't take any damage, and it won't create, it's not like Nested Ghoul, which might be worth showing. It's not like Nested Ghoul where you're going to get bodies either way. Instead, the Tangled Colony has to die for you to get those tokens. So I really like this card. Don't get me wrong. I'm very impressed with this card. It's in my cube, I should say. But here, I don't think it belongs. Looking back to Nested Ghoul for a second, just to see the difference. Nested Ghoul just says, whenever a source deals damage to Nested Ghoul, create a 2/2 black Phyrexian zombie creature token, which I think is just very, very good. And you're going to be much happier with this card, as it'll just be a lot more functional. However, it's a 5 mana card and only works in the zombie tribal, and once again, is a lower power card. So I'll leave that to you. The thing I do like about this is, like, it's a 4/2, and if you make it a 5/5, you might say, well, Curse, you just said that that's only +1/+1. But the fact that it's +3 toughness, and the main problem is the fact that this needs to take damage and survive instead of just trading a 4/2 into a 2/2, that's something. That being said, the fact that it's not 1/2/2 per damage makes me kind of disinterested in that card. I just wanted to mention it because it was on my mind. All right, let's see. Deathbloom Thallid is just a bit too fair. It's both only sacrifices for 3, which means it only makes creatures into 3/3s, while being a 3/2 itself, which means it doesn't get a big bonus from 5 CMC creatures. So I don't particularly like it. I think we can cut that for sure. Lord Skitter is fantastic. I think this is much better. Whenever you every combat you get a black rat token is really, really nice. I think this is much, much better than the Tangled Colony. It is a 3/3 for 3, which means it doesn't get a big bonus, but as a token generator, I'm generally impressed. Ophiomancer, very, very good, although once again, you're only getting that one snake, so it's just the fact that it's just kind of a good card will hold it up for a while. Preacher of the Schism says, whenever it attacks when you have the most life. This feels really cute. I don't think this is very good. I think this is going to be very, very clunky. I think it's cool the fact that this could get you tokens, but the fact that it's only on attack and only if you don't have the most life, which means you're not drawing a card, this just feels like a very, very clunky card. And if you're not in Vampire Kindred, I don't think you should be playing that card. Sedgemoor Witch is interesting, but not in this deck with 8 instants and sorceries. Very, very interesting. Don't get me wrong. I would be very interested in a build of this deck that's much heavier on instants and sorceries and uses Sedgemoor Witch. This is not that build, and therefore does not work here, unfortunately. Woe Strider, I think, is fine. Blood Vial Purveyor, I don't know why this is here. I'm particularly confused. It creates blood tokens, which we don't want our opponents to have, and then it grows in power, which we don't want it to do because we only care about its mana cost. This just feels like just backwards, right? We want high CMC and low power, where this is high power, low CMC. So I think this is, granted, it does have Flying Trample, which does make it a very nice target for something that'll add, like, make it a 13/13, but I will note that's only +6, which is just not as good. Moving on, Bone Picker is neat. I like Bone Picker. I don't have a problem with that. I think its Flying Death Touch is good, but once again, Bone Picker having 3 power is kind of not where you want to be, which means you have to sacrifice something that's at least 4 CMC, including itself, which is, I think, kind of the perk of it, for it to gain any extra power, which I don't love. But it is an interesting card. Kalitas, I've mentioned before, is great. I really like them. Notably, they make a bunch of zombie tokens, so I very much am a big fan. And the fact that it puts counters on itself is nice because that works with the base power thing. Rck Demon, I guess this works with Delirium. Not quite sure why this is here. I don't think this particularly belongs here, though the art is rather good. Once again, it feels like a Flying Trample card, but you need to, even if you sacrifice something 5 CMC, you're only getting +1/+1. If you sacrifice something that's 7 CMC, you're only getting 3 extra power, and that's particularly bad. So this is notably very bad, I would say. Let's see. Phyrexian Obliterator, same problem. This is a creature that you do not need to buff this card. Like, you want to give an additional bonus. You do not just want it to get base power changed because it is a very efficient creature in base power and toughness. So this isn't the card. This isn't the deck for this kind of card. Solemn Simulacrum, I think that's fine here. I think this is one of those decks that this is just fine. It's not a very good card, but here, the fact that you can sacrifice it, I do kind of like it. Spawn of Mayhem. You pay 3 mana instead of 4 for a 4/4 for 4. Once again, I don't really think this is particularly good. It grows, which I do like. Once again, the +1/+1 counter, but I don't think it's the deck for this card. Cleaving Reaper, once again, kind of interesting to me. I notice all these cards have Flying Trample, and I wonder if you searched for Flying Trample to put these cards in. I just need them to have much lower power, because once again, the creature you have to sacrifice in order to make these cards stronger has to have a lot of CMC. I will note, though, Cleaving Reaper is really cool to me because you play it, you sacrifice it that turn, and then you pay 3 to return it to your hand, pay 3 life, because it itself triggers its own ability. So that is something I think is notable for that, but I think that's very good if you lean into more tokens and more on the zombie plan, because then you can just play 5 turn after turn, make all your zombies into 5/5s is really, really good. Though, as I mentioned before, Digraph Ghoul, Rakshasa, Gravecaller, they already do these things, so I would prefer these that leave bodies when they do that. Looking further, Doom Whisper, once again, Flying Trample. I feel like that's what you were searching. This card I am more impressed with because I think it's particularly good with your delve creatures. However, this is a lot of life you have to pay. It basically makes every delve card delve like mana in their cost Phyrexian Black. And I think I really like that. But even then, this feels like if you were all in on delve, I would like this a little more. Ghoulcaller Gisa is very, very strong in this deck. Very, very strong. The last deck I looked at also really benefited from her, and I'm glad to see her again. She is fantastic in this deck, and I'm really happy to see her here. Death Rattle Oni. Once again, you need to be an aggro build, so this can fit into a zombie build. I think sometimes that downside is more on you than your opponents, because oftentimes if you attack with 10 zombies and then you sacrifice a 4-drop and now they're all 4/4s, or like a 6-drop, and you don't defeat that opponent but they block a bunch of them, if you cast Death Rattle Oni, you're going to destroy all your zombie tokens that have probably survived combat. So the idea is neat, but I don't think the execution fits. So this is something I would cut. Marshmith's Titan is perfect, although as said before, the more you go into tokens, the weaker this card is. Phyrexian Flesh Gorger works really well in the artifact version of this deck, but it's also just generally a good card. Obviously, the prototype makes it both a really good target to be buffed and a really good buffing target, as for 3 mana you have 7. You can make everything to base 7. Writhing Necromass, once again, if you have a very creature-based deck, you're going to be very happy. I think this one's particularly strong, so I do like it. Abundant Maw, once again, probably not a token card. Both Emerge cards benefit from not being tokens. This one's probably the weaker of the two. Both of these I would like in the Eldrazi build. I think there is a version of this deck with Eldrazi, because you get to play things like Eye of Ugin, Eldrazi Temple, a bunch of other colorless Eldrazi enablers. So there really is an Eldrazi version of this deck, and I think you can put this in there, but here it feels weak. Whereas Distended Mindbender, wow, I'm glad that was the next card, I find to be a lot more impressive because its ability is just so much stronger. And notably, remember, we want low power. 6 power is too high, whereas Distended Mindbender at 5 is at least a little lower. Both of them are probably too high to get very big bonuses from the Meep, but are worth thinking about. Once again, in an Eldrazi deck, I find this to be a very impressive creature. Gorex in our graveyard builds are very, very good, but do note that it's only creatures. This is something I missed a few times when I played with this card. I assumed it was that you exiled any cards, but it is creatures that you exile. However, that does make it a very cheap delve, because it's like pseudo delve where each creature counts as 2. So in zombie decks and in creature-based decks, you're going to be very happy. Demon of Death's Gate, I think, is cute. It is asking a lot. It does have that flying trample ability, but you are never attacking with this and the Meep, right? Because odds are Demon of Death's Gate is getting smaller through the Meep. It is not getting stronger. So the flying trample is really cool if you just want to attack people a few times, but much more reasonably, you're going to play this, immediately sacrifice it, and turn all of your creatures into 9/9s. That's not bad. It is asking a lot, and I'm not too impressed by it, but this is a very, very cool card. Emrakul, I think, fits once again in the Eldrazi version of this deck, because there's a lot you can do. Once again, the flying trample is the thing that I think is notable in a lot of these cards, but it's also just a very good card. So I like it, but once again, I would probably build it in a dedicated deck or a dedicated mill deck. Up to you to decide. Shadow Mortality obviously is one of the easiest ones to turn on because you just need to have like half health and then it's 2 mana. But even before that, you're particularly happy. This turning things into 15/15s is often just lethal against at least a few opponents. And you're not going to play this card fairly and keep it around because once again, at 7 power, this card is going to shrink more often than it grows. Looking very quickly at anything else that really catches my eye, there's a few of these like really big X spells. I think you do have to kind of, I think you have to pick 2, maybe even pick 1. I would say the easiest thing to look at is Dread Summons. You play it in the zombie variant. Their number is Legioned. You play it in the artifact variant. And Empty the Pits. You play it in the Delve variant, but you do not play all 3 because they are very, very mana hungry, and outside of going very specific into their goals, like Empty the Pits gets better with Delve, Dread Summons gets better the more creatures that you have, and their number is Legion is better with artifacts somewhat. Ugh, I really don't like this spell. It's so much mana. It's 5 mana for a 2/2. Yeah, I don't know. And the Necrons, that's what they're called. Yeah, maybe don't play that one, but Dread Summons is the one that attracts me the most. As mentioned before, I really, really like the zombie build of this. I know Empty the Pits also makes zombies, but I think you need a lot of cards in the graveyard for this to be good with the XX cost. So the one that really gets me is the Dread Summons, and I would build around that the most. Let's see anything else here. Artifacts, generally happy with that. Tribute to Hirobi is very, very interesting to me. I think the fact it creates so many tokens and then gives it back to you, I really do like that. However, the thing that gets me is, how do we transform this card? There it is. Echo of Death's Wail is kind of not as ideal because, well, it is a flying haste. It's just because it's at 3 power and it has technically 2 CMC. It makes it really, really bad as a target for both sacrificing and empowering. That being said, obviously gaining control of all the rat tokens is the main reason you play this. And I'm sure there's sometimes you will have a rat player that's going to be very mad at you and drawing a card. I think it's good enough, but it just doesn't jive as well as you'd like it to. This is very, very close, but not all the way there. Likewise, Bitter Blossom is a card that I know it's a big favorite of all of ours, but just a little too slow in a deck like this. Like, I feel like there's going to be some turns. I mean, here's the thing. If you can get this out, get your commander out, and immediately start smashing with like 3/3 fairies, I think you'll be very happy. But even that is very, very slow. If you draw this card anytime after turn 5, I think you're going to be pretty unhappy with that. So generally, I do not like this card. We have much better ways of creating tokens. And the rest, I think I generally like. Lands are good. I think you could go up to 36, 37. You do have a 3 mana commander. I keep thinking they're 4 mana. Yeah, maybe just one more land then. I think you'll be pretty happy. And the rest of the deck looks somewhat sound. So as I kind of clean up, as we've almost hit 45 minutes, I will say I do like this deck. I really like this commander. I really do think this is a commander that you need to pick a direction and you need to go for it. I think sampling the whole buffet, let's say, does have some perks where you get to play cards that are harder to hate out. Like if you have, I think notably missing from here, could be wrong, Gurmag Angler, right? Gurmag Angler is a fantastic card, 7 mana with Delve, very easy to delve out, zombie fish, and easy to sack. You're pretty happy with it. Here's the thing though, if you have that in hand and you're like, oh, well, it doesn't particularly matter if someone hits me with Rest in Peace because it's the only card that has Delve in most of my deck, well, then it's probably hard for you to get Delve active. You haven't built towards it, right? And notably, even we use this as an example and we look at how it works alongside something like, where is our Tall Giant, Marsh Mist Titan, and we can see that they don't actually work really well together because there's a lack of black pips in our Delve card, right? So this will only subtract one mana from a possible 6, which you really desperately want to reduce. So like, it's kind of interesting. Something like Phyrexian Fleshgorger, for example, it doesn't gain the prototype mana cost. That's the whole point of it, right? So this doesn't even give us any devotion towards that color. So it's just important to kind of, like, if we split off into too many directions, I think we're just gonna have a really hard time making the deck just fit into what we need it to be. Whereas I think if we pick a direction and stick to it, we're gonna have a much better deck to kind of lean into. Like I said before, I think for the build you're making, the most accessible one is zombies. The second most accessible one that I think is probably pretty strong is the modular / black artifacts. And just for me, if you want to make a deck for me, it would be Eldrazi, I think would be the third way I build this because it really catches my eye as an interesting mechanic. And who would ever imagine the Meep Eldrazi? I think that would be a lot of fun. For now, I think the Meep is really, really interesting. I'm having some flashbacks of Zira, where this is a commander that feels built to be difficult to build, but doesn't provide what I would consider an overwhelming amount of like victory power. So it's like you're working really hard for something that doesn't easily win you the game. I guess that sentence says the same thing twice. I'll say reliably win you the game. So this is kind of hard for me to build, and I think it's hard for a lot of people to build. So if you find any of these directions to be interesting, I'd love to see another draft of this deck because I think there could be a really successful version of this deck, and I'd really like to see it. If you'd like to send me a draft of that deck or any other deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you would like your deck to be one of my donation decks, there is a link down there as well. And finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would appreciate that. We're almost at 500 subscribers, and that would be a lot of fun to get to that big number. All right, I really like the Meep. Ever since I saw them, they look very cute. Can't imagine they're evil. Good luck, and I'm excited to see more drafts of this deck.